we're live. Welcome to this session on small abattoirs. My name is Patrick Holden. I'm Chief Executive of the Sustainable Food Trust. We've been interested in this issue for the last 3 years because small abattoirs play an absolutely central role in allowing farmers to sell direct and add value. And to coin a phrase, you can't have local food without local abattoirs. They're a vital part of the infrastructure of the food systems we need to move towards. And local food needs to become mainstream. It's needed for all sorts of reasons: health, the environment, biodiversity, and food security. And of course, it's much better for animal welfare because it reduces distance to slaughter. You probably know, many of you, that we've only got 62 abattoirs, small abattoirs, depending on how you define them, left in the UK. And globally, there is a similar trend towards centralization. Yet there is a rising demand for local, high welfare, sustainable and healthy food. So this session is to explore the barriers to the regeneration and the renaissance of a thriving small abattoir sector. We want to look at the burden of regulation, of paperwork, and of the lack of coordination across government. We need to find a way to get the small abattoir sector really get going again. And we've got 4 fantastic speakers. The first to whom I'm going to introduce to you now. He is Will Harris. Many of you may have already heard him in the previous session. Will is a 4th generation cattleman from Georgia in the United States. And in 1995, Will made the decision to return to the farming methods of his great-grandfather, giving up their conventional practices and dependency on pesticides, antibiotics, and everything. And as part of that change, they've subsequently decided to build an on-farm abattoir designed by Temple Grandin to be as humane as possible. And the plant is zero waste. And of course, they use all the parts of the animals. Will, welcome to this session. Thank you very much for joining us again. May I start by asking you to tell us a little bit more about your farm and what motivated you to build an abattoir?
Sure, Patrick, and thank you for having me on today. The White Oak Pastures is my farm in southwest Georgia, the coastal plains of Georgia. It's a multi-generational, multi-species, vertically integrated farm that was founded by my great-grandfather in 1866. As you said, I'm the 4th generation. One of my daughters is sitting here with me now. She's the 5th, and she's got a 4-year-old son who's the 6th generation here on the farm. Today, we pasture raise 5 red meat species: cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits. We pasture raise 5 poultry species: chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, ducks. We hand butcher them here on the farm in 2 separate USDA inspected abattoirs or slaughter plants, one for red meat, one for poultry. In addition, we raise pastured eggs, organic vegetables, and honey, and a number of other little ancillary businesses that support the organism that's White Oak Pastures.
So we're going to move to the United Kingdom after this discussion with you, but we're obviously very interested in how your plant is regulated and how many government and state bodies are involved and how difficult it was to get it in place. And does it make a difference that you sell only locally compared to export?
That's a lot of questions. Yeah. So it's Georgia is the first of how is it regulated. Georgia is one of, I believe, 16 states that has what's called a Talmadge-Aiken rule, or follows the Talmadge-Aiken rule. And that means that state departments of agriculture can inspect meat processing to the federal standard. So it's still got the USDA inspected logo, but we deal with the state health Department of Agriculture. There are people that say that's the worst of both worlds. I have not found that to be the case. We have a good relationship with our inspection service. One must remember they're not here to serve at my pleasure. They're here to see that regulations are followed. And as long as one keeps that in mind, the relationship, and you're not trying to get by with anything, untoward, then it's a good relationship.
So you prove to them that you can be compliant with their regulations, and they are therefore giving you a fair wind to do what you want to do. Is that true?
I think so. I think that in time, we've been operating our red meat plant since 2008, so 12 years, and we've never had a serious issue of any sort. So I think that you develop a reputation for being one that plays by the rules. The most important thing, the first thing that a meat plant owner must recognize is, as inconvenient and expensive and troublesome as these regulations are, they are in place for a reason. They are in place because somebody did something wrong at some point in the past, and a regulation was put in place to keep it from happening anymore. I don't agree with all the regulations, but they're there for a purpose. And so many small plant owners have the mindset that they're trying to keep me out of this business. They're trying to keep me from having a slaughter plant. And that's not the case. The rules are there for reasons.
Yeah. And how important do you think it is that you have an abattoir on the farm to your customers?
Well, I could not operate the way we do without it. When I first made this change from industrial centralized commodity meat, beef at that time, I was only a beef producer, to what we do today, I used outside slaughter capacity. And I exhausted that outside capacity before I became profitable. They couldn't do any more for me, and I was not doing enough scale to make money. So I had to make the decision to either build my own slaughter capacity or go back to the industrial commodity model. And I chose.
So just let me be clear about this. What you were saying is that without your abattoir, your business couldn't be viable, and it has only become properly viable with an abattoir.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
Wow. Another question. This really fascinates me. I learned when I spoke to you in a podcast that you compost all the waste from the slaughterhouse. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So we slaughter about 100 cows per week, a 5-day week, 100 cows per week, 40 hogs, and 40 sheep or goats. That's generally the case. That generates about 9 tons per day, 5 days a week, of what they call packing plant waste that we consider to be a nutrient stream. That would be eviscerate, gut fill, feathers, the bones that aren't good soup bones, etc. We grind this up and we compost it here on the farm. The packing plant waste being the nitrogenous product, peanut shells or wood chips being the carbaceous product. It makes wonderful fertilizer.
How long is the composting process at different times of year?
It's about a 1-year process for us. I don't have the elaborate turning compost turners that I would like to have. I do it with a front end loader, so it takes us longer. We could do it quicker, but about a year.
And do the authorities check it for contaminants or for bacterial load or anything? What do they check it for?
We check it primarily for the temperature. Very tight temperature controls are in place. There's really no room for contaminants. I mean, we handle it the whole way through, so there's no opportunity, reasonable opportunity for contaminants.
So it's just the pathogens that you're trying to destroy the pathogens with the heat, the composting temperature getting to a certain level.
Correct. Yeah.
And you don't have any problem with that, and the regulators don't give you any problem.
No, as long as we maintain the temperature and the logs showing that we maintain the temperature, then it's not been a problem. And I should say, we don't sell any. We use it all here on the farm.
And what contribution do you think that the abattoir waste makes towards your fertility plan for the farm?
Well, it's very significant. I don't know how one would measure it, but it's very, very significant. It's like the essence of life, plant life and animal life, composted into microbial life And we have my own truck to apply it. We put about 2 tons per acre per year. And our pastures are really, really abundant. They're very productive.
If I've been inspired by hearing you talking about this, and I suspect there's a lot of people listening to you now who are thinking, we wish that we could have abattoirs, maybe not on our own farms because we're just not simply big enough. But what would you say would unlock this potential? Because we're all very worried about this. We have so few small abattoirs left, so many farmers wanting to use them. What's your advice?
Well, there are reasons why there aren't many abattoirs. It's a highly regulated industry. It's a capital-intensive industry. It's a industry that is wrought with spoilage and shrinkage. And there's a lot of reasons why people choose to not do it. It's probably, I'm 66 years old, and I've taken some pretty incredible risk in my life, and building those 2 abattoirs is probably the most risk I've ever put myself through. Our total investment in processing is about $7.5 million. That includes the order fulfillment for online sales and the value addition to make further value-added products, but it's very capital intensive.
So, we can't all have abattoirs or our own farm, although there is a small abattoir being planned and will be launched shortly by one of the people who works with the Sustainable Food Trust, Jane Parker. But if we are going to have to rely on local abattoirs, and do you think it would be important to get them all composting their waste if that can be achieved?
The waste stream has got to be dealt with, both the solid waste stream and the liquid waste stream. So there's no question. In this country, part of the USDA certificate of inspection includes being able to show proper utilization of what happens to the waste stream. So it's essential here. And I personally believe that the highest and best use is what we do, which is the liquid waste is treated and goes out as irrigation water on the pastures, and the solid waste turned into compost and used as a soil comment on the pasture.
Well, is there anything else you want to share with us? Because I better move on in a moment. Final comments. How much do you think your story can be transferred to the UK?
Well, I don't know too much about the UK, but I think that anyone who has the financial capacity to borrow the money and can do it. It's the risk is what's hard to avoid. Yeah. The only other thing I would like to say is that it's not just the compost to deal with what was otherwise waste. We make leather products. We make dehydrated organs. We make broth and soup and demi-glace. Utilizing everything as part of the animal is essential to monetize the production.
We're going to talk about hides later. So, Will, thank you very much. If you can hold on, hopefully you can participate in the discussion at the end. So thank you very, very much for joining us. Very inspiring. So I'm now going to pass on to our next speaker, Emily Miles. Emily has been Chief Executive of the Food Standards Agency since 2019 after moving from DEFRA, and she's overseen the introduction of a program to address some of the regulatory issues facing small abattoirs, and has appointed a dedicated small abattoir officer. We're really grateful to you, Emily, for joining us, and I would like to say, before I say anything else, that we know it's not easy for you, and you're not responsible for all the barriers that are confronting the small abattoir community. So thank you for what you're doing. I already know that you're doing a lot. So first, maybe I could ask you to say a little bit more about the place of small abattoirs and how much of your attention is given to them, and which areas specifically come under the SFA responsibility, food safety, hygiene, welfare, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. I'll just say something about the FSA to start with, just so that people know who we are. So we're the Food Standards Agency. we were set up in 1999 in the wake of a meat crisis, the BSE crisis. We put consumer interests at the heart of the food system. And in our statutory mandate, we're there to protect public health and to look out for consumer interests in other consumer interests in food is the phrase in our statute. We do a lot of policy work, we do legislation, regulation and so on, and we work in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. There's a separate Food Standards Scotland organisation. But we also do the meat hygiene controls in slaughterhouses and cutting plants around the country. So we have around 900 staff, of whom about 300 to 400 are ours. The remainder come from a partnership with Evelyn Jones, who provide us with official vets. And we have a presence in 245 slaughterhouses in England and Wales, 595 standalone cutting plants, and 167 cutting plants that are co-located with slaughterhouses. We contract with DAERA, the Department for Agriculture in Northern Ireland, to do these controls in Northern Ireland. So that's our overall responsibility. We then obviously also have a presence in the small slaughterhouses as well as the big ones. And just if I could just bring up the slide, Josh, if you could just put that up for us. This is a complicated slide, so I'm not going to talk you all the way through. I don't even know if you can read it. I can barely read it. But what it's trying to show in that blue box at the bottom is that there are lots and lots of different rules that apply to slaughterhouses. And slaughterhouses are a very heavily regulated part of the food chain because there's a lot of risk there. Because we've seen some of these food scandals happen in the past, whether it's food safety scandals such as BSE or an authenticity scandal such as the horse meat crisis that we had in 2014-15. So you can see that the FSA is basically the face of government in a slaughterhouse. But some of the controls and the checks that we do are on behalf of other government departments. So if you take the animal welfare rules, for instance, in England, DEFRA own that. In Wales, that's a Welsh Government responsibility. And we are asked by DEFRA, and they give us money every year, to operate the controls, particularly the pre-mortem controls, to check that animals are safe when they arrive into the lairage and they're okay. So I hope that gives you a flavour. There are some things that we absolutely own in our responsibilities, particularly around food safety and food hygiene. But we're also often operating on behalf of other government departments.
Well, thank you very much. Now I want to ask you a question which you could ask in a personal capacity or on behalf of the FSA. How important do you think the small abattoir sector is in our country?
So, I mean, I think it's really important. In fact, Josh, you can let go of the slide now. Thanks. So I'm happy to share that later for people if they want. I think if you look at the way that food supply has become a big issue for us in the last year, we can see that there are some fragile nodes in the food supply system, which if they go wrong, things start stacking up and causing a problem within days or weeks. You can see that today in Northern Ireland with food on shelves there in shops because of some of the border issues and some of the GB exporters not wanting to take product into Northern Ireland because they're concerned about regulation and export health certificates and so on. But you could also see it last March when we suddenly had this shift where all this food which was intended for catering and hospitality could no longer be used and we needed to bring it into retail. So that you often get these nodes where there's a single point of failure. And I think if you're reliant on a centralised approach to slaughterhouses, where lots of product goes through one or two or three big places, as soon as, for instance, you have a COVID outbreak there, or you have something else go wrong with that place, it starts backing up issues around the food chain. So I personally think, and this is a personal view, that a more distributed model is more resilient, and that's important for food supply. I think the other thing.
How refreshing to hear you say that, if you don't mind me saying so. But how ironic that you're presiding over an incredibly centralised slaughtering system.
So, and it's not for the FSA to design that system. And in fact, I think the government as a whole has got a view that the market should work this through, the market should provide. And I think there's a whole question about what role the government should take in intervening to ensure food supply. And I think to some extent, certainly the DEF review would be that it's not really for government necessarily to intervene, that it's as much in an interest of the supermarket or the retail end of the market to make sure that the supply chain behind them is working and resilient. So there's more than one actor here.
But if you don't mind me saying so, economists would call this market failure. The fact that the financial burdens apply disproportionately on small abattoirs, you must realize that. And ironically, so if we leave it to market forces, the biggest are just going to get bigger because they've got loads of economies of scale.
So, and again, I feel like that's where we start getting into questions about the economic questions for the food chain rather than the consumer interest questions for the food chain. The one thing I would add, though, is about this consumer interest point. So it's very deliberately the case that the FSA is not there to protect the economic interest of the food sector. We are deliberately there for the consumer interest, because that was what went wrong in the BSE crisis, that basically the people in mass who knew about the fact that there was this transmission between livestock and humans just were worried about how that was going to affect farming, and therefore didn't share the information with consumers. And that damaged trust between consumers and the government on food for years, and it certainly damaged the UK's reputation abroad with exports for years, and we've just got access for our beef to the US market. So that's a long explanation to say the consumer interest is crucial to what the FSA does. I was just asking our head of social research overnight to tell me what consumers are currently saying about access to local food, because until now there hasn't really been a big consumer push on wanting access to local food, and it's often characterised as a sort of middle class issue that and it's the elite who care about it. I just thought I'd share these statistics with you because they're quite interesting. So we do a consumer tracker where every month or two we're doing a survey with consumers just to see what's happening, and we stepped that up after the pandemic hit and lockdowns hit. So we're finding that at the moment, a third of us are buying food from local shops more often than we used to. 29% have used their local corner shop or convenience store for the first time during the pandemic, and 1 in 3 people have been buying from a regular local supplier like a farm shop or a veg box. That's much higher than normal. It's particularly common amongst younger respondents and those with more money. So the money thing is playing out here. We're finding that the new digital models are enabling people to find their local suppliers as well as to stock up on their big shops. So the digital platforms are enabling more local food. We also, our research, even before the pandemic, told us that about 1 adult in 10 is what we call a conscious consumer. So they care deeply about food, where it comes from, highly conscious of animal welfare issues. Probably most of them are at the Oxford Real Farming Conference finding out what's going on with their food. And they care about the impact of plastics on the environment and so on. But we also know that 1 in 5 adults is struggling to put food on the table at all. So we're getting this sense of literally not quite knowing where the next meal is coming from. They haven't got enough money, a lot of anxiety about food poverty. And we just don't know what the overlap is between the conscious consumer and the food poverty consumer. It's probably safe to say that if those people felt they had a choice, some would choose to buy differently. And so I think increasingly there is a consumer interest in this question about local food. I think it's emerging. I don't think we can yet say it's absolutely clear that every person in the country, it's in their interest that food should be local, because there's a price point here as well, which is very important. But I think it's increasingly the case.
Yes. Well, look, I mean, I understand that it's not your brief to talk about the economic issues. You can observe them and have a view, but that's not the FSA remit. But what is your remit, I believe, is this issue which I discussed with you previously briefly, this issue about the scale and the risk. What's your position, or the FSA's position? That it seems to me there's an abattoir, an integrated abattoir near you, isn't there, where you live, where the chap said, you know, I've got 500 inspectors, they're my customers. And would you agree that, even if you don't agree with him, might you agree that if you've got a very small localized food system, there's proportionately less risk to the public interest of some mass contamination issue with pathogens or something than there would be with a big abattoir, which needs to be heavily regulated?
So I think that I don't think you can rely on your customers to do your inspection and make sure that you're following best practice in food safety. I think that would be a dereliction of duty, actually. And I think it's only fair that customers should expect that food businesses take their responsibility seriously. That's what our expertise and our advice is for. That said, has been the case up till now is that most of the regulation that we inspect against and we apply to abattoirs is in a one-size-fits-all approach. So we apply the same standards to the biggest and most complicated abattoir as to the smallest, and we apply the same standards to the most compliant abattoir as to the dodgiest abattoir. And what we're looking at the moment in a reform programme that we're organising called Operational Transformation is to try and segment the abattoir, the meat industry, so that we're applying, in effect, an earned autonomy. And one of the things that we will consult on the way that we do that segmentation and what criteria should mean that you have less or more inspection and less or more responsibilities given to you as the food business operator. But one of the possibilities could be looking at risk, as you say, Patrick. So, if you're distributing product to 1,000 people as opposed to 300,000 people, clearly the risk is lower. So do we apply a different approach? We're thinking that through at the moment, and we'll be talking to the meat industry a lot about it. But there's obviously a very big consumer interest here that we want to make sure is reflected in our thinking.
Okay, well, look, coming to the end of the time, and I've got a couple more questions for you. Firstly, do you have a view, maybe again, it's only a personal view, about the welfare implications of animals having to travel very long distances to slaughter? I mean, I know near me, I think there's an abattoir where lambs are coming down from Scotland. It just seems to me that a lot of people are giving up eating meat for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are animal welfare implications, and in fact, although it's something that we we do on behalf of DEFRA and the Welsh Government in abattoirs, lots of FSA staff care enormously about it. We have the controls are run by official vets and by meat hygiene inspectors, and they do care a lot about the animal welfare issues. The DEFRA is just doing this consultation on welfare and transport at the moment, and the FSA would support the further commitment that they are doing to ensure the UK position themselves, as DEFRA would put it, as world leaders in animal welfare. I think maximum journey times will help that, but having my personal observation would be having a rule about maximum journey times without having an infrastructure to support that from the slaughterhouses is going to be problematic.
Well, I hope that gets tweeted out there. So, final point. Now, this is to make it clear to everyone who's watching this. Your area of responsibility does not include the environment. That's right, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah.
It doesn't include.
There's one aspect where it does, but not in relation to waste in abattoirs. So we have to regulate and authorise new products, food products to go on the market, or food preparation processes like chemical washes. If we were to consider and decide and advise ministers on whether to authorise new novel foods, we would also look at the environmental implications of those foods, as well as the consumer interest and the food safety implications. So that's one area where it does come in, but we are not responsible for dealing with waste from abattoirs.
Okay, so you're not responsible for the environment. We get that. You're also not responsible for making policy, are you? That's DEFRA's job.
Well, no, because we're a non-ministerial department, we do have some policy-making responsibility. What we can't do is decide the policy. So ministers decide the policy, and actually mostly we do that with health ministers. So we'll put advice to Welsh health ministers, Northern Irish health ministers, and Westminster health ministers. We work incredibly closely with DEFRA a lot too. I mean, their official controls relate to biosecurity, ours relate to food safety.
So strategy and the wider public interest, you could put your views forward to these policymakers and regulatory agencies, even if they're not listened to. Yeah,
and it is how we define the consumer interest in food is up to the FSA, and that's a broad. We can choose to take a broad definition of that. And as a policy making department on the food safety and hygiene front, we obviously have a role in that broader ecosystem of food policy and strategy.
Okay, well, look, this is
Patrick, what are you trying to get at?
I'm getting at that. In a way, you could say, and this is part of the unintended consequences of the creation of the Food Standards Agency, it's all become a bit siloized, hasn't it? Is there a high-level strategy group where you get all these people who make environmental policy, who think about the links between the public interest, animal welfare, the composting, all the issues that have come up, where you think about this at a high level? So
actually, it's got worse than when the Food Standards Agency was set up. We've just celebrated our 20th birthday. We were set up in 2000. In 2010, as the Lib Dem and Tory coalition came into government, the FSA's remit was significantly constrained and lessened. And the responsibilities for nutrition and diet and obesity were passed over in England to the Department of Health, and they've ended up in Public Health England. And responsibilities for what's called compositional standards in food, so the question of whether honey is honey or margarine is butter, was handed over to DEFRA. So actually it's got worse, it's got more fragmented. And then in addition, in 2015-16, the devolution to Scotland happened, so Food Standards Scotland is now a separate entity. Now, if you're a food retailer, for instance, you are now dealing with several government departments and 4 governments for your food label. For instance, if you look at a food label, it's got nutrition information, it's got food safety information, it's got ingredients, it's got calories. That is completely distributed around different parts of government. In my view, that does not serve the consumer.
So are you lobbying for the creation of a leadership group?
Yeah, so there is a nascent leadership group which DEFRA, David Kennedy, has started chairing. At the moment, though, it's not dealing, I think, with the issues that it could be dealing with. We're looking ahead to Henry Dimbleby's National Food Strategy. There'll be a preparation of a white paper in response to that. But for me, in addition to that policy work, there are operational issues that we could attend to. So these questions about abattoirs and whether, for instance, our regulations collide with each other on the ground, whether the Animal Plant Health Agency, Rural Payments Agency, us, whether we're joined up, there's more we could do on that. Same with data requirements that we put on food industry. We could do so much more to join up our thinking. And I do think more integration and more joint strategic working is absolutely fundamental. And just to say one last thing, if we want to make a difference to those big challenges in food around diet and around the environment, we have got to step up our strategic work in that way.
Well, thank you for being so refreshingly honest and direct in your answers. We really appreciate you joining us. And if you are free for a few minutes after this, on the Zoom, that'd be great, because I'm sure people want to ask you questions. Thank you very much, Emily. We're now going to move to Marissa Heath, who coordinates the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Animal Welfare and was behind this report on small abattoirs, excellent report published last year, which highlighted the problems facing the small abattoir sector and what should be done to address them. And one of the proposed solutions was to set up a sector group to represent small abattoirs. And with Marissa's help, this has now been established with a small number of founding members, including the Sustainable Food Trust. Marissa, thank you very much for participating in this. Just what is the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Animal Welfare exactly, and why did it decide to focus on small abattoirs?
Thanks, Patrick, and hello to everyone. So the All-Party Parliamentary Group is comprised of cross-party politicians, all parties. We've got about 160 members, and they work together with key stakeholders, which are vets, NGOs, industry, all of that kind of thing. We're currently chaired by Lord Trees, who is a vet. There's only 2 vets in Parliament. He's one of them, and Tracy Crouch, MP. And we're quite a pragmatic organisation that recognises animal welfare does not exist in isolation of other areas and other issues. So we aim to work with industry and business to get to solutions that help animal welfare, but also have impacts on other areas like the environment. And we've looked at farm animal welfare for many years, mainly welfare at slaughter. But in 2018, we were approached by someone from the Animal Health and Welfare Board who showed us the statistics on small abattoirs and the rate of closures. And it was a real red flag to us, because we were of the view that many of the things government were trying to achieve, which included animal welfare policy, would be under threat if we didn't have this infrastructure of small abattoirs and this local production of farm animals. So we decided to get involved in this inquiry and work with the Sustainable Food Trust, amongst others, to really look at the issue, work through it. And the result was a report published in June 2020, The Future of Small Abattoirs, as you've mentioned. And it's a report which we think was very timely, because at that point, the agricultural bill was making its way through Parliament. It just hit the House of Lords. And we were able to speak about the importance of small abattoirs in relation to the future for farming in the UK. So that's really what we're about and why we got involved in small abattoirs.
Well, tell us about the key conclusions in the report and how it's been listened to by the government, including, obviously, within the agriculture bill. How are we doing?
Yeah, so far so good. I mean, there's certainly an opening. We were very clear in the report that one size fits all infrastructure is going to fail to meet the international objectives and national objectives we've got around animal welfare, the environment and food security. And basically there's different business models for livestock rearing and slaughter. We recognise there's farmers who are producing for large retailers who aren't going to have their needs met within small abattoirs. But we were very clear that there were small producers who are producing for specific markets who need these small local abattoirs, and there has to be a choice in order to ensure a strong, functional and sustainable market in the UK. So our first ask was financial, because at the end of the day, the small abattoirs are closing, and I think Will touched on it. It's an expensive business to run, and the infrastructure in many of these small abattoirs was very aged. When they were being asked to make updates to keep up with regulations and things like that, it was basically the final straw. They couldn't afford it. Compulsory CCTV, the stunning that came in last year, all of those sorts of things. We were looking at, £5,000, but it was just too much for these small abattoirs to keep going forward. So, of course, our first recommendation was to the government to say, what can we do within the agricultural bill to support these small abattoirs, to help them upgrade, to help them get the right infrastructure in, to help them be able to do perhaps more species. And we looked at what is being called public money for public good. And that's all around supporting things like environment, low carbon production, animal welfare, conservation. And we said, well, small abattoirs really tick some of these boxes, and therefore they should be included as what's known as an ancillary activity within the agricultural bill. And we were absolutely delighted that the minister agreed to this during I think it was the third reading in the House of Lords, and said, yes, small abattoirs should be included. So we had quite a quick win on that one. There's still quite a lot of work to do, though, in setting out exactly what that would look like and how money would be given to small abattoirs and exactly what for. But,
well, it's clear from what you've already said that your agenda is our agenda. I don't want to display bias as the moderator, but it sounds to me everything you're doing is brilliant. What would give you more traction and more influence? Do you need more members? Do you want some more environmental groups to join you? What would help?
So you mentioned the abattoir sector group. We are not going to government with our hands out saying that, we've got to be propped up. That's not what we're saying at all. We're saying we can be sustainable. We are a core part of what you're trying to achieve. We just need some help to get going. So what we really need is to bring the voice of small abattoirs and small operators together to create a louder voice, to say we are an important part of the rural economy and we want to make this work. We want help to create robust business plans, to put in the right infrastructure, to deal with those really, really important issues like animal byproducts, waste disposal, which Will touched upon. And in order to do that, we really need to sort of build the influence. We need to make our MPs aware that this is something that is needed in their rural environments that they're representing. And yeah, I mean, membership is a good thing, but we also need people to flag when they're responding to consultations. Emily touched on the consultation at the moment on live transport. We're quite concerned that consultation doesn't talk enough about the provision of small abattoirs. If you really want to make a difference to the welfare of animals via transport, you have to have that placement of abattoirs in order to reduce distance.
And you care about the welfare too. What's your view about the welfare issue?
I'll say that again, sorry, Patrick.
The welfare issue, I mean, how strong are you on that?
Look, our report looked at the benefits, obviously, to welfare, but it also looked at the economic reasons to have small abattoirs around, because we're aware and, supporting the work of the FSA, our welfare standards in all abattoirs are pretty decent in this country. They're high. We didn't have so much of an issue of the welfare within the actual abattoir.
No, I'm thinking more the distance to slaughter.
Oh, the distance to slaughter. Again, there's a lot of evidence that says it's more about how you do that transport. With some of the larger abattoirs, they're using collection points where different animals are mixing and they're bringing them to places where they're loading and unloading them. So there's definitely welfare concerns around that for us. But I think from a common sense point of view, all of us would know that to take an animal 1, 2, 5 or 10 miles maximum down the road on a short journey is surely better than 6, 7, 8 hours in a vehicle. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, look, last question. I'm sorry to go fast because we've got to get all the speakers in, but What about the last point? And it's going to be a nice link to the next speakers. What do you think about the importance of adding value to the byproducts to make the whole thing more viable?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big issue within our report looking at that. Firstly, we came up with 3 ways to get through this. One, we said that we thought the waste collection market in the UK is not as competitive as it should be, and that small abattoirs are facing costs that are too high. So we've asked for that to be reviewed. But actually, the real focus is, and the real win for small abattoirs is how they can be so sustainable. So we've got a priority piece of work which we've put into the abattoir sector group, which is going to set out a modern plan to deal with animal byproducts. First objective being, let's reduce Cat 1 as much as possible. Let's start speaking with whatever replaces the European Food Safety Authority to explore alternative processes, get down to as minimum or zero amount of Cat 1 as we can. And then we also suggest looking at the renewable energy plants, anaerobic digesters, creating cooperatives around using them that could work. Again, solutions in this are technology, and that's money. So we have also asked that there's government funding for capital payments under environment schemes, and we have put pressure on the government to include small abattoirs in that as well. And just to really touch on the point that will lead into your next speaker really well, I think the most shocking thing that we saw in the inquiry when we called for evidence was images of hides being thrown into skips or incinerated because they had no value, and they were actually costing our small abattoirs money to get rid of. So we really are asking for exploration around opportunities to explore integrated solutions where you can better exploit the 5th quarter. So by that, I mean a small tannery integrated with an abattoir to serve a number of farms in a given area, a pet food brand of a specific marketing objective. Again, we feel that can come under the funding for ancillary activities in the agricultural bill. And we want to set out how small abattoirs could potentially look at doing that kind of thing.
Well, Marissa, thank you for your excellent work. For anybody who's watching this who wants to get involved, I'm sure you'd welcome their interest, and maybe there are some organizations listening and watching who might want to join, because we need to increase your influence. So thank you very, very much for speaking.
You can send me an email and I'll put them on the contact list and let them know what we're doing.
Okay, well, thank you. And now, as you said, your link is perfect to our last speakers, who are Alice Robinson, who has a background in the fashion industry, and Sarah Grady, who's been involved. They've both been involved in a number of initiatives, particularly in Sarah in the Hudson Valley, New York, supporting regional farming and food culture. And they're now collaborating on a new project supported by the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association and the Prince's Countryside Fund to create a new supply for traceable leather made from the hides of animals raised on pasture-based farms. Alice and Sarah, you're going to give a talk now. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. So we have a presentation to share, but thank you for that introduction. We are Grady and Robinson. So I'm Sarah Grady, and I'm currently based in the UK, but as Patrick mentioned, I was formerly the Vice President of Programs at Glenwood, an agricultural organization in the Hudson Valley of New York, supporting regional agriculture and agriculture.
And yes, as Patrick mentioned, I'm a designer. I've spent the last 4 years sort of researching the traceability between some small farms that are in my area and being able to transfer the hides and skins into fashion products and collections, and how that could be integrated further into be possible for other designers.
So the concept for our project is to create traceable leather from the hides of pastured animals raised on agroecological farms. And as I mentioned before, for the time being, we will be operating as Grady and Robinson.
So just to give a little bit of background, but as Marissa mentioned, hides are typically sold on by the abattoir, and even just several years ago, an abattoir could get a significant revenue from their hides, often helping them to discount the cost of slaughter to farms. However, in recent years, as a result of globalization and other dynamics, hides have lost this value, particularly those coming from smaller scale abattoirs. It can now actually cost money for an abattoir to dispose of their hides that won't get used, which is dismaying both the farmers who have invested great care to the animals and huge resource in raising them. I experienced that firsthand, the knock-on effect of that firsthand in the decreased value of hides. On the right is a collection I made with my local farmer, who sadly, through no fault of the abattoir, but there was no market for that hide to be going into. So I just sort of purchased meat from this farmer. He sold to our local butchers and was a real part of our food community. And I really wanted to be able to work with that hide as my in my design practice. Hides in many cases have become more of a faceless commodity, which can disappear without any identity and traded in vast quantities. So that's part of our motivation of how to address that.
Yeah, and so we're working to respond to this loss of values in hides and the fact that sometimes hides are being wasted, as we've heard. It's our goal, obviously, to see that hides instead can be used meaningfully. And we're motivated by wanting to ensure that animals that are raised for food are fully utilized out of respect for the animal and the farmer's care in raising that animal. And we know that farmers typically don't have options regarding the destiny of their hides, and they do appreciate knowing where hides are going. And I'll just share a story from my experience in working in New York in the Hudson Valley, where I was part of an organization with a working farm. And when we wanted to know what was happening to our hides or following the path of those hides, it was impossible for us to do that. However, there's a vegetable tannery in that region. In fact, happens to be the tannery that White Oak Pastures uses as well to create leather goods from their own farm hides. And I saw this terrible disconnect because that tannery was in fact buying in hides from the Midwest and from other parts of the states, despite being in a region where they were surrounded by wonderful grass-based farms, basically right in their backyard, with slaughterhouses just up the road who were sending those hides off into, as Alice said, an anonymous commodity system. So I began to try to connect the dots there. And in fact, I'm continuing that pilot effort as well in New York while simultaneously working on this project here with Alice in the UK. But in the leather industry, there's a gap, and that's what we're trying to fill, as Alice said, for a designer who has values wanting to support humane and ecological farming. They have little or no options to choose leather with traceability so that they can know what the story was in terms of the animal's life that produced that leather. And meanwhile, of course, you know, similar to what we've seen in the local food movement, you know, in fashion and materials, there's a rise of interest in traceability and ethical materials and sustainability. And of course, we can see that this is where the leather industry is going.
So our process is in development. We're currently at a pilot stage. We started the process by being able to source the hides. So we've been selective in choosing hides that support biodiversity, soil health, and grazing livestock with ecological practices. We're fortunate to have a partnership with the PFLA, as Patrick mentioned, to begin this pilot. So regarding our criteria for farms whose hides we're using, at the moment we'll be working with 100 grass-fed Pasture for Life farms and organic certifications. And if needed, we'll review this criteria to be able to grow and sort of add to our supply. But we're testing out a regional hub-like system. So we're working with one abattoir, which currently serves a cluster of PFLA farms in the surrounding area. So we're able to coordinate with them to be able to get schedules and collect the hides and ensure those traceabilities go straight back to those farms and that none of those hides are wasted. We think that this hub-like system will be best suited and able to be replicated regionally. And it's something I think that is a system that not as the exact same system, but sort of this thinking of regionality and being able to join practices and connect those dots regionally to be able to ensure this traceability. It has happened in other industries, and I think that with leather, it's a good place to start.
Right, so in terms of how we're carrying on from there, we are purchasing hides from the abattoir. We're paying the current market price for those.
Sorry to interrupt, Sarah. Patrick, we have 5 minutes left in this session, at which point we can carry on Zoom. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, well, look, can I encourage you to just conclude fairly quickly, because everyone who's asked questions, please transfer to Zoom, and we'll be Josh will be hearing from me how to do that, right?
Yeah, we just have one more slide after this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so just to explain that we're paying current market price for the hides to the abattoir, and we are also at the moment paying an additional fee to the farms. As we prove the viability for our project, we want to offer as much value as we can to both farm and abattoir for their care in supplying our hides. So right now, hides are collected, salted, stored, prepared for transport to the tannery. We are contracting with a commercial tannery that will be providing vegetable tanning methods to transform them into leather. We will have the possibility of creating custom finishes and look and feel for the leather, but we will also have our own kind of house portfolio, so to speak, for our finished leather. And then, the biggest last question for us is just cultivating a market for this. So, as I mentioned, we see a rise in interest here, but it's obviously necessary for us to build the value and the appreciation in the fashion, accessories, and interiors markets that will be the customers for this leather. So we have a few early commitments for our first pilot tannage. We are obviously already starting to pursue broader outreach to expand that marketplace. And one note quickly is that there is a concept we're hoping to develop to provide a service for farms where we would essentially take raw hides and return to them finished leather goods, so they would have a new value-added product that they could sell through their own direct marketing channels. So it's very nascent stages for that, but we do intend to do that.
So quickly, just to say a little bit about our timeline, we are currently about
very tight, if you would, because we're about to run out, I think. I think we might be running out. Keep going, just a few more seconds.
I think it's more important to just say thank you very much to the Party Association for their support, and to the Countryside Fund for their support in our pilot, and thank you for including us in tonight's panel.
Well, Alice and Sarah, I think what you're doing is fantastic, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to support your work. I hope we can furnish anyone who wants to be connected with you with your emails. And I'd also like to thank our other speakers, because I think collectively we've really seen the whole span of the importance of the small abattoir movement. And of course, it's vital that the fifth quarter and what you are doing is the final link, which can make perhaps otherwise unprofitable small abattoirs financially viable. So thank you all. Now, Josh, I don't know if you're listening to this, but if you could intervene at this point and just make sure that everybody knows how to go onto the Zoom, where hopefully all our speakers, I'm not sure that Will can join us, but there we are. So it's only an audio stream, but that's okay.
Yes. So our team will post a Carry On Zoom link in the chat in Crowdcast. So anyone interested in carry on this discussion, please follow the link. And for you presenters, the Zoom link is in the private chat. So,
okay. Well, let's hope I can get there. And if not, then hopefully everybody can chat between each other. So are we ready to transfer now, Josh?
Yes, transfer as soon as you like.
Okay, well, I'd just like to thank everyone who's listening and watching this for participating. And please do your bit, buy locally produced meat from local butchers, get your local MP to visit the abattoir, do everything you can to increase the pressure and the interest in small relocalized food systems and livestock products, because without them, we can't make the transition that everybody's been talking about at this event. So thank you very much.